Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Daily Six. Do you have your Bibles? Get Genesis chapter 21 open. We're going to see this morning what happened next. Yesterday, we learned how God asked Abram to take a knife to the most intimate personal parts of his life, the part God was going to need Abram to have to fulfill his promise. And God said, trust me with that covenant. Let's see what happened next. It's going to get good and then challenging again. Genesis 21. Come on with me. So all this week we've been discovering how God was leading Abram and Sarai to understand the calling God had given to them, the creation God had given to them to be the founding and the parents of this family that would be a family of holiness throughout all of human history to represent the relationship between God and humankind. And 24 years go by, layers of crisis where they doubted God, they believed God and they doubted God, took matters into their own hands, created a mess. And then God asked Abraham, we learned yesterday, to take a knife, a sign of a covenant, circumcision, that would be a sign and a symbol of his trust with the Lord. That's a pretty big sign, isn't it? A pretty big move of trust to do that as a 99-year-old guy. Well, God finally responded after Abram had taken the knife to everything about himself to really demonstrate profound trust in God with this thing that was so important to him, this promise so important to him. Well, within the year, God finally steps up. Chapter 21, verse 1 says that now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he'd promised. She became pregnant, and she bore a son to Abram in his old age at the very time that God had promised him. Abram thought God had promised him this gift, this son, 25 years ago when he was 75. But God knew this was the very time. God gave him the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. And when his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abram circumcised him as God commanded him. And Abram was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him at the very time God had promised. 25 years into Abram's journey of faith with this. But it's going to get challenging. Go over to chapter 22. It says here in verse 1 that sometime later, God tested Abram. And he said to him, Abraham, well, here I am, he replied. And then look at this, verse 2. God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah and sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Now, this sounds horrific. God has promised Abram and Sarah, Abraham now, named Abraham and Sarah, God has promised to give to them a child and to birth this nation, this great family through them. And once he's born, 25 years in the journey, Abram's 100 years old, there is just no way that there could be a replacement to this child. Not that you could ever replace a kid. And sometime later, we're thinking, actually, there's a little evidence in the text that maybe we're talking 12 years or 13 years or so, somewhere into Isaac's later childhood, early young adulthood, God says, take him and sacrifice him on an altar. Now, we know from really all of the Bible in many, many places in the Old Testament that God despised child sacrifice. This doesn't even feel like something God would lead a person to. So God is working within the context of Abraham's experience of culture, that there were other people around, other nation groups around that would routinely sacrifice children. And God says, all right, hey, are you willing even to do that? And so a whole complex theology here, but God is not, we're going to find out, God doesn't really want Abram to kill Isaac, but the call, the impression Abram gets is go sacrifice him. So verse 3, early the next morning, do you notice that? There's an immediate response. Abram doesn't even miss a beat. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he'd cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. Instantaneously, he obeys. Now, we're going to discover tomorrow how all this works out. But Abram, he takes the wood, and Isaac's wondering, what in the world are we doing here? Verse 8, Abram answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went up together. Oh, friends, this doesn't make a stitch of sense. To Abraham, to Isaac, what in the world are you doing, God? Asking me to do something that is in fact atrocious. But what God was after, much like the sign of circumcision, God was after this absolute level of obedience. And Abraham had gotten to that point in his life. Through all these journeys, these 25 years, he got to the point and said, I will trust God. God will be the one to provide. Friends, can you give God 6 more minutes and can you contemplate this? Pray about this. What do you need to sacrifice to the Lord, to lay on the altar? God may or may not take that and do something with it that we fear. What do I need to lay on the altar so the Lord will in fact be my Lord, that I will trust him in full obedience? Oh, this is complicated, I know. I'm going to teach on it this coming Sunday to give us a good 30 minutes to unpack this. But for now, would you give God 6 more minutes, and then let's see what God does tomorrow, right here on the Daily 6.